Let's start off with another question. I started with the question this morning. I'm going to start with a question this evening. Have you ever had a dream that was so real or seemed so important to you that you woke up and you started trying to think about what it could mean and maybe write it down or try to tell someone about it? I see a few heads shaking. I know Miss Sherry Ann and I were talking beforehand. There's a lot of different people that think a lot of different things about dreams. But when we look at Scripture, one of the ways that God revealed Himself more times than not was through a dream. Now, sometimes you can eat the wrong thing and you get all kind of weird dreams. But then again, there are times when we're going through things that God's Spirit, if we'll just quiet our minds, can be able to help us through, to help us figure out things that we need to do, and everything else through some of these times of dreaming. But there are times I know that I've woken up and I've been scared to death. There's times when I wake up and I look to see where I'm at because those dreams are so real. And the reason I bring this up is because in Daniel chapter 2, we're going to look half of it tonight and we'll finish it up, Lord willing, next week. It's all about a dream that God specifically gave to King Nebuchadnezzar. So we met him last week in Daniel chapter 1, talked about how King Nebuchadnezzar was chasing after the Pharaoh and had a good battle to be able to drive the Egyptians back into Egypt, and then came after Jerusalem and took some of the best and brightest men to become leaders within his own court. And we saw Daniel and his three men, friends that we know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that were trained for 3 years and then presented to the king, and there was something special about them that he recognized and was able to give them positions within his kingdom. So we pick up in chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, and we see that the king had one of those kind of dreams that he kept having in different ways, but he kept dreaming the same thing, and he understood that there was something different about that dream compared to every other dream that he had had. And so let's look at Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, and see how the king desired to know and understand what the truth of this dream was all about. It says, in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Now, before we really get into this text and talk about the dream and what it meant and the people that he's calling in and everything else, I think it's important. I've tried to make sure if there's something that's controversial about Scripture that we talk about it enough to understand how some people will come against the Scriptures and try to discredit it. Notice when it says that this takes place. In the very first verse it said that in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, he had these dreams. Now, the reason I said we need to just take just a moment to address this is there are those liberal scholars that we talked about a little bit when we did the introduction lesson that try every way they can to discredit different passages of Scripture. This is one of those passages, and we'll look at why. In verse 1 it says that this took place in the 2nd year of his reign, but then they'll say, but we got a problem here. Because in Jeremiah chapter 25, it says that the 1st year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar was the 4th year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Israel. Well, of Judah. Last week we saw that it was actually in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim that Nebuchadnezzar captured the city and brought Daniel and his friends to Babylon to be trained. And so based on that, this isn't the 2nd year, because supposedly, you think about Daniel 1, verses 5 through 18, it told us that Daniel and his friends were trained for 3 years before they were presented before him to be able to do service. So that would put it in the 4th year, not the 2nd year. And so that's what they tried to, no, there's a time problem there, and so you can't rely on this text. It can't be historically accurate, therefore you can't trust the text. Well, like most things, there's an explanation. And so when we think about this, sometimes when we see dates given and timing of different events, it's not so much of a physical year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, but so many years after another previous event takes place. So if you think of it in that term, chapter 1 describes when they were brought into captivity, how long it took for them to be trained, to be presented to the king, to be put into service. And if you take it that way, then you come to chapter 2, and the second year would be the second year after they went through that training, after they were first presented, after he first came to know them, and they became part of this overall group known as the wise men. The other way to take this is to understand from their own sources, from Babylonian literature. There's not a whole lot that remains, but when I was studying, Albert Barnes talks about the writing of a Berosus, Berosus, and he was actually a Babylonian, and he was a priest of one of their pagan gods, Bel Marduk. And he wrote that when Nebuchadnezzar first came to power, he was a co-regent. In other words, there was the king, and he was a co-king. So they had two people ruling at the same time. It was his father and himself. And so his father's name was Nabopolassar, and he was the one who actually sent Nebuchadnezzar with the army to go drive out their enemies and to begin building their empire. And that's when he was able to take Jerusalem. During this time, after 2 years, his father died, and then he became the only king of Babylon. And so it would be the second year of reigning by himself. So either way, we see that we shouldn't just throw the text out and say, oh, well, the Bible says it was this date, and this passage says it was a different date, so it's not trustworthy. There's lots of ways that we see time accounted for throughout the Old Testament and New Testament that if you do a little bit digging and you begin to think about how all these texts come together, it's not something that should cause a problem. But like I said, I just wanted to hit that before we really get into this, because today, as much as any, if not more than any other time, people are trying to discredit the Bible to be able to say, well, if we can't trust this, then we can't trust that part, and you might as well just discredit the Bible as a whole. With that out of the way, let's get back to what it says. So it says, in the second year of the king, all of a sudden he starts having dreams. Well, I thought he had a dream, because when you get to the end, he says, tell me what my dream singular was. Well, we come back to the question, have you ever had a night when you go to sleep, you think everything's okay, and all of a sudden you have a dream? And it's so real, it's so lifelike, you can tell there's something important, or it seems like it's important, and you wake up, and you're all fright, you're all in panic, you're all excited, and then you go back to sleep, and you dream the same thing, and you wake up again, all excited, and you go back again, and you have the same dream again. Now, Miss Sherry and I have, I don't know if you have, but have you had those times when it's the same dream over and over and over, and you can't figure out what's going on, but it's just so real that something's got to be in this dream? Well, sometimes that's how it happens. Other times, and I've had this happen a couple times, I've had a dream where I dreamed something one night, and whether it's the next night or a couple nights later, I could just, say, I dreamed the same thing I dreamed last time. Maybe another night goes by and I dream the same thing again. Doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. And so I can understand a little bit. He says he's having these dreams over and over. Either it was the same dream over multiple nights, or it was the same dream several times in a night, but it says that he had this dream over and over. That's why it says he was having dreams, plural. He didn't just have it once, he didn't just have it twice, he's had it several times, and it was literally causing him to lose sleep because he realized there was something that he just couldn't put his finger on, but it was important. It seemed to be a matter of life and death for him or his kingdom, but he needed someone to try and explain this dream to him. If you've had a dream like that, you can understand a little bit of why this was such a big deal to him, maybe. But you notice something else. The dream bothered the king so much that it said he gathered a whole bunch of different types of people. He gathered all these different types of people, and it names them. If you go back through the verse itself, it says that he called to him magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, a special group of people that existed within the Babylonian Empire. We're going to talk a little bit more about them specifically in just a few minutes. But Kyle and DeLitch, in their commentary on the Old Testament, says that these were different categories of people, but they were those that were called in to advise the kings. If you think about Moses when he was in Egypt and he was trying to get Pharaoh to let the people go, who did he call in? He called in the magicians and the sorcerers. Well, we see the same thing here. There were those enchanters, magicians, wise men, Chaldeans, and so they were different types of people. One group was known for their learning of sacred literature and writings. They studied the writings of their own people, and they studied the religious writings of other different groups of people. One of the groups practiced incantations. Those are the ones who are we would say, casting spells or speaking spells, incantations. Another group practiced various types of magic arts. And then the Chaldeans appear to be one of the priesthoods, if you will, of the gods of Babylon. So the Egyptians had their priests for all the different gods that they worshiped. God's legitimate worship had those true priests that served the Israelites on behalf of God. And so these Chaldeans appear to be a special group of priests that worshiped and served these false gods. And so these are the kind of people that he's calling in to say, I've got this dream, it's really important. Y'all are supposed to tell the future, so I need y'all to tell me what's going on. And then the last thing that we see about these opening verses is that the king wanted to know specifically what the dream meant. Some people, well, God doesn't use dreams. Well, this isn't the first time we see in Scripture that God used a dream with someone of the highest importance within a city or a nation, is it? You go back to Joseph, and one of the things that made Joseph special, and we were talking a little bit in Sunday school this morning, was that God gave Joseph himself dreams about his brothers bowing down before him, and they didn't like that. That was part of why they tried to get rid of Joseph. But then he had another dream and had mom, dad, and the brothers bowing down to him, essentially. Well, when he was in jail, God again gave these visions to different men, gave dreams to different men, and used it for his glory, because as these men came to Joseph, the baker came and said, well, I had this dream, and the cupbearer came with his dream, and unfortunately he had the job of saying, well, this is the interpretation. The baker, you're going to go back, but you're going to be beheaded. To the cupbearer, you're going to go back, and you're actually going to be put back into service. Remember me when you get put back into service. And he didn't remember him at first, but then God gave a dream to Pharaoh. And it appears that he had the same kind of dream over and over and just wanted someone to tell him what the dream meant. And again, God used Joseph for his glory to give that interpretation. Now, in that case, he was given the dream, and all Joseph had to do was give the interpretation. A little different here. So this king has a dream. It's caused him to lose sleep. He knows there's something important. He doesn't know what. He calls in all these people that should be able to tell him his fortune, but notice what happens next. He wants to make sure if they're going to tell him what it means, that they can tell him the truth about the dream. We want to know the truth, right? Sometimes it hurts, but we want to know the truth, and the king wanted to know the truth. Look at verses 4 through 6. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. Joseph had it easy, didn't he? Joseph had a gift from God. He had the gift to be able to give interpretation, but he had the dream told to him, and all Joseph had to do was tell Pharaoh what the dream meant. There's 7 lean cows, there's 7 fat cows. You're going to have 7 good years, then you're going to have 7 bad years. You better get ready. But in this particular case, the king doesn't even call Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in. Notice he's just calling in those people that are from the Babylonian Empire to start with. Those enchanters, those magicians, those wise men, those Chaldeans, those priests of the different gods that they worship. And so when he calls them in, he wants to know what's going on. But notice their very first thing. Well, you tell us what your dream is, and we'll tell you what it means. I never thought about this. The way had the question this evening was, well, did he know the dream, or did he want them to tell him the dream? And then, yeah, that is my dream. Either way, he was saying, I want you to tell me that you know what my dream is actually all about, and then tell me what it means. And so, Ms. Sherry and I are talking, how many different people try to tell the future in different ways today? You have people that still read tea leaves. You still have people that supposedly read the omens with little chicken bones or whatever. You have people that do the tarot card readings. You have people that come up with horoscopes and look at the stars and try to tell the future. Well, if you're born in these months and the stars are like this, then this is going to happen, and you're going to meet this kind of person, you're going to have those kind of... People still try to find truth in all the wrong places today. But there comes a point when people get tired of just hearing things and trying to figure things out, and they say, I just want to know the truth. This king, for whatever reason, he said, I want to know the truth. I want to know that you know, one, what did I dream? And two, what does it mean? But notice their first thing, well, you got to meet us halfway. You tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it means. A lot of times when people go, I've never been, I've only heard about it and I've read about it and I've seen these shows on TV like probably you have, when different people supposedly can tell the future in this way and that way. But what is it that they do before they tell you what they ask a lot of questions, don't they? Asking questions and questions and more questions, trying to find something that they can pull and gravitate to. And then they try to ask more questions to link this thought to another thought. And then eventually they get around to telling you, well, so-and-so is trying to tell you such and such. And they try to bring... But it all starts with questions. What are these people doing? Asking questions. Come on, King. Tell us what you're talking about, and we'll do what we normally do. We'll tell you what it means. Well, in the middle of this, notice who actually speaks up. He's got all these different groups, but it's the Chaldeans who actually speak up. It's these false priests, these priests of false gods, and they speak up. So I said we'd talk about them a little more in a minute. Again, Kyle and Delitzsch, in their commentary, go further to say the Chaldeans were similar to the Egyptian priests. They applied themselves to serving the false gods. They sought the greatest glory through studying astrology. They devoted themselves to prophecy, foretelling future things by means of sacrifice, incantations, seeking to turn away evil and secure that which is good. They possessed the knowledge of divination from omens, of expounding the dreams, and skillfully casting horoscopes. So they were predecessors of the people today that are still trying to do all these same things and trying to make a living off of other people by coming up with all these different false ideas about what's going to happen in the future. King Nebuchadnezzar, for whatever reason, he finally caught on. I think it's kind of sad that it took this dream to finally get him to say, all right, I want the truth. No more fooling around. Either you know what you're doing or you don't know what you're doing. And if you do, then I want you to tell me everything. Notice the penalty. He said, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to tell me the truth and you're going to be blessed beyond all measure. I'm going to give you honor. I'm going to give you riches. I'm going to give you a better job. Or you and your household are going to be put to death in a very painful way. I'm going to tear you limb from limb. I'm going to destroy everything you own, which included their families in ancient times. So he said, either you're going to tell me the truth or you're going to die. Well, that'd be kind of a lot of motivation to say the right thing, but obviously they couldn't. We get to verse 7 through 11, and it says that all the wise men had to recognize something. They couldn't speak the truth. Let's look at how this happens. All right, so verse 7 picks up. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you were trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said that there's not a man on the earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. I think it's very telling, the response that they give to the king. So they start off, let's try this again. King, we need a little help. You tell us the dream, we'll give you the interpretation. Problem for them was this king was not weak-willed, and he was not weak in his mind. He was no longer going to be pushed around and anything else. He says, I know what you're trying to do. And he comes right to the point with them, doesn't he? He says, I know what you're trying to do. I know you've already talked to each other. You can't figure this out. So when you come before me again, you're just trying to buy yourself time. You're hoping that you can try and get me to forget about the dreams. You're trying to tell me something that I want to hear just so that you can keep your job and you can keep doing what you're doing until I'm gone and the times change and some other king comes to power. He says, but I'm not having it anymore. I want the truth. I want to know what my dream was, and I want to know the interpretation of my dream. And so when they come back, they're still trying to hem and haw. They're still trying to find a way to be able to save their skin, if you will, literally in this case. But they say, we've got a problem, king. Because you won't help us, we can't help you. So when they respond the third time, they ask twice, just give us the dream, we'll give you the interpretation. The third time these Chaldeans speak, they give a reasoned explanation why they can't. And the first thing they say is, they argue that no man alive can do what you want. God's going to prove them wrong, but at this point they can think of no one that could ever do such a thing. There is no man that has the wisdom, the knowledge, and they had to recognize that before the king. We can't do it. No one else can do it. We can't tell you what you're thinking about. But then they said something else. He said, no such request has ever been made. It's kind of like, king, what makes you so special that you get to ask us to do something that no one can ever do? No one's ever asked anything like this before. Why are you all of a sudden asking such a thing? So now they're trying to blame the king for putting them in this position in the first place. It's your fault we can't answer because you're asking us to do something no one can do and no one's ever asked anyone to do before. And then the third thing they said is, you know what? We're appealing to the sympathy that this is a difficult position. How are we supposed to respond? We can't respond because there's only one way that answer can be given to you, which is their fourth response. It has to come from the gods. The gods have to give you this information. The gods have to give us this information. The gods are the only ones that know things about the past, the present, and the future. The gods that we worship are the only ones that control things, but because they have no dwelling with us, then we can't know what the truth is. And I think it's telling because, if the gods that they worship have nothing to do with the flesh, if the gods that they worship couldn't reveal anything truly about what has been done, what is, and what's to be done, then how did they do all these other things in the time leading up to this? So they're having to admit, they're having to confess, whether they like it or not, we can't do anything except for hope and guess and come up with something that sounds about right. And so why are you asking us to do this? And so when you think about it, it's sad that people are still falling for the same thing today. Again, when we were talked about just how many different ways people try to get truth. People go to those that read the tarot cards. They go to people who seem to have special knowledge. They go to people who can pray and hopefully get some kind of special knowledge. See the same thing in the Old Testament. We see the same thing in the New Testament. You think about Simon the sorcerer in the book of Acts. When he became a Christian and all of a sudden he sees the Holy Spirit come on people, he wanted to buy that gift from the apostles so that he could do the same thing. And he was condemned for it. But all throughout time we see people doing this. But when push comes to shove, they have to admit we really have no knowledge, we really have no power, we can't do anything. Because the gods we worship, if we worship a God at all, isn't the real God. And if they are, they have absolutely no dealing with us. Isn't that sad? That people throughout the world worship false gods that they admit can't do anything to help us because they're so other. They're so distant. And so this king is really getting discouraged and upset all at the same time. Notice what happens next. The king was ready to take care of business. I told you one of two things is going to happen. You're going to tell me, or you're going to die. Verse 12 picks up. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. You know, up to now, we haven't heard anything about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego, have we? Chapter 1 was all about them. Chapter 2, he has a dream. We know he was impressed with them. He put them into service, but instead of calling on them to come, as impressed as he was, he simply called those he was used to calling on, and when they couldn't give him the information he wants, well, then we're going to kill all of you. Guilty by association. And so Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego obviously didn't know what's going on. We're going to see that specifically in a minute because they're going to have to ask, why are you looking for us? What's up with this decree? But at this point, all we know is that the king isn't getting the answer, and so anyone that was considered an enchanter, a magician, a wise person, or a priest of some god that wasn't able to give an answer, he said, you're all going to be put to death then. And that's why they're looking for Daniel. They're looking for his associates. In this particular case, when the people are getting tired of being lied to, they finally get to a point where they're willing to do all kind of crazy things to get to the bottom of the situation. Now, when we're lied to, we could understand why someone would get upset, right? We could understand where truth would want to be told. We want to understand to mark somebody, the way the New Testament says. When someone's teaching something false, the church is told to mark those people so that other people don't give into the teaching that they're giving. In the same way, it was right to be able to say these people can't do the things they say, but it wasn't right to put them all to death, at least based on their laws. You know, in the Old Testament, we do see that those who practice sorceries and idolatries and all these type of things, they were to be put to death under the Old Testament law. Today, we don't do that. Why? We live under the New Covenant. We live under grace. We still mark them. We still explain why what they're doing is wrong, and we stay away from it. But the point is that all of a sudden this king says, the only thing I can think to do is to actually go after these people and put them to death the way I said, because he didn't want to lose face. I said I was going to kill you. You can't give me the truth, so I'm going to put the whole lot of you to death. And in the meantime, Daniel and his friends were sought out. Verse 14 to 16 goes on to say, then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Daniel acted pretty calm, didn't he? You know, as we look at what do we finally learn about Daniel before we close for tonight, because the lesson was too long to do it all in one night, and so I had to figure out a good place to stop it. So tonight we're going to end with this, but notice after everything's said and done, Daniel finds out you're about to die. Why am I about to die? Well, the king ordered it. He ordered all the wise people, regardless of who they are. If you're part of this group, you're going to die, because no one could give the king an answer to his dream. And so one of the things that we see that really sets Daniel and his friends apart here is as soon as he sees this, he doesn't pitch a fit. He doesn't try to run away. What's he do? He asks questions. Well, what's the problem in the first place? Why do you want to put me and my friends to death? And so as I looked at this, I came up with a few things that really stuck out. First of all, he remained calm and collected in the face of opposition. You know, this had to be a peace of God. You know, it talks about the peace of God that passes all understanding. This had to be that kind of peace that came from God, because if it had been me, I'd have probably been freaking out just knowing me. I don't handle stress well a lot of times. If anything, I can get defensive, and yeah, Krista's shaking her head. Yep, he doesn't deal with stress good at all. But there's something to be learned here. He says instead of freaking out, instead of panicking, instead of just losing it and getting defensive and everything else, he stays calm. And then he does something else. He begins to ask for the truth of the matter. He asks for the facts. What do we do? What's the problem? Let's figure out what the problem is, and then we can start working on a solution. But notice it says that how did he do it? With prudence, with discretion. He's thinking this through. Before just reacting, before just speaking, he's calm. He's letting God lead his thoughts. And so he says, with prudence, with discretion, he begins a conversation. I'm willing to go with you, but before I go with you, can you tell me what's wrong? Can you tell me what I did? Oh, the king wants us dead. Why does the king want us dead? Why is this such an urgent matter? Why does he want us dead now? And this is just the first time I've heard about this. And so because of the way he addressed this chief of the king's guard, the captain of the king's guard, it said he was willing to give him a response. He was willing to tell him, this is what was done, this is what happened, this is why the king is going to put all of you to death. Maybe he gave his condolences, but said, but this is what the king said, this is what's got to happen. But then there's something else. Daniel confidently put his faith in God, knowing that God would either save him, or God would give him the answer, or God would help him to face whatever was about to happen. And so after he asked those questions, after he begins to try and figure out what's going on in the first place, it says, then he went in and asked for an appointment. One of the things we're going to see is he didn't have to try and save everybody else's life. He could have just tried to save his own neck, but instead he simply says, can I please have an appointment to talk to the king? No one else could do it. Maybe he'll at least let me come in and talk to him. And so when we leave off this particular passage for the night, it says, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation of the king. At this particular time, Daniel didn't know what was going to happen. Daniel didn't know what the dream was. Daniel didn't know the interpretation of the dream, but he wanted an opportunity to go to the king and ask for an opportunity to let God lead him. Daniel was pretty brave in the first place. We think about last chapter, in chapter 1. It's eat the king's food, drink the king's wine, do what the king wants, be educated the way he wants, and you'll live. Instead, well, I can't eat that food and I can't drink that drink. Can we just eat the fruits and veggies and the water? I'm not going to risk my neck for them. But as they proved their faith in God, and God proved faithful to them, it made such a difference that all of a sudden his handler said, you know what, you don't get anything but salad for the rest of the 3 years. And there was something very unique about them that God was able to use them. When we get to this passage, he again shows that calm and says, just trust me. If I have to die, I die, but will you please let me speak to the king? And I trust that just as God led me in the past, God is going to continue to lead me and direct me in some way or another. And so as we think about that, there's a lesson to be learned, even just the way he handled this. Now, God may not give us the gift of interpretation of dreams, but he does give us his Spirit as Christians. When we become Christians, he gives us his Spirit, and he says that his Spirit is to comfort, to give us counsel, to help us understand his word, to help us do ministry. He is God's presence in us. And so as we think about that, we think about all the different impossible situations we face in a lifetime. A lot of things we say are impossible. Well, they're possible with God's help and with God's leading, or they may be things that aren't as important as we think. But when we're in those impossible situations, Daniel shows, keep your head, keep calm, and come before God. Seek God's will. And we're going to pick up there next time and see that's exactly what he did. He didn't go in and try and just beat around the bush. He comes in and they take that time to pray, to get God's wisdom, so that they can then glorify God. Proverbs 9:10, we'll close with this verse for tonight. It says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. That was the difference. What we're going to see throughout the rest of these encounters with Daniel, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and King Nebuchadnezzar and other kings, the difference was they didn't fear the king, they didn't fear dying, they feared God. And as they feared God, as they put their faith in God, in God's Word, and sought God's wisdom, that's what made the difference. versus those who tried to do things on their own to try and snow people over and say, well, this is what it means. And that's no, they started with that fear of God, and they built their life on that. When we trust that God can help us through something, we may not have an answer. We might not even be able to survive a situation. But he says, but it's best to put your faith and trust in me and let me lead the situation than to just try and do it on our own strength. Because when we try to do things on our own strength, then we do panic, then we do get defensive, then we do make bad decisions, and we don't have the answers that we ought to have because we don't seek them from the right source in the first place. So Daniel begins to do that here, and we'll pick it up there. Are there any questions or comments before we close for the evening?